All right, so this is the review for the Unit 2 test, mainly focused on Rome and Greece. A couple questions about Han China and a little bit about India as well. Starts out with a map question, a couple of map questions. All right, and then Augustus, we learned about him after Julius Caesar. And in the end of the Second Triumvirate, you have Caesar Augustus take over. And he did a lot of things, including expanding building projects, creating jobs for people. And then he also gave emperors the right to name governors. So we talked about how the empire was so big that it needed a way to be able to manage it and control it. And so the best way is to have governors in control of the different regions and basically report back to the emperor. And then Greece, looking at Greece, one thing we talked about at the beginning was the physical geography of Greece, how it's very mountainous and a lot of islands and things like that. And so because of the mountains, because of the islands and the access to the sea, most of the city-states in Greece were built along the coast. So about 90% of the Greek population lived within about 10 miles of the coast. And of course, the mountains divided everybody up. So that's why these city-states developed separate from one another. You don't see a unified empire like what we saw with Rome, because these mountains have separated them too much. And of course, it's going to develop different, slightly different cultures and things like that in the region because of that. And of course, a lot of trade along the coast. And then Cleisthenes, we talked about him with Athens. He's the one that really developed the foundation of democracy. So he's the one that really came up with voting and helped really support the idea of democracy and created the Council of 500 there in Athens. All right, then you need to know why Rome fought Carthage. Remember, Carthage is the city-state in northern Africa. And as Rome was expanding, it was basically running into Carthage and the area that city-state had conquered. And so they're fighting over control of the Mediterranean. So first they fought over Sicily, which is that island off the coast of Italy, big island. And basically, if you control that area, you can control the entire Mediterranean. So that's what they're looking to get. Because once you control the Mediterranean, you control all that land surrounding it. And then tyrants, going back to Greece, there were several tyrants that took over in Athens and other city-states, and tyrants are people that seize control through force, and so usually military force and things like that take over. So there's no democracy, and of course that's going to create a lot of problems within the government, no freedom for the people or anything like that. All right, then the age of Pericles in Athens. So during this time, every male citizen was eligible to vote. It's a direct democracy, so every male citizen that could vote voted. He also, again, worked on public works projects, big temples. He had the Parthenon built in Greece, in Athens, and several things like that, and really encouraged trade outside of Athens. Right, the reason why Athens traded so much really had to do with the fact that there was a large population in the city, and there wasn't that much farmable land. And right around Athens, I've been there a couple times. It's very mountainous. The soil, you can't really farm on it. So in order to survive, they needed to trade. That's how they survived, and of course, fishing in the sea that was around them as well. And then looking again back at the physical geography of Greece and how it affected the city-states, again, it goes back to trading along the water, because really the only major city-state in Greece at the time was Sparta, that was inland. That wasn't exactly right on the coast. All right, and then the Peloponnesian War. This was a fight between Athens and Sparta. So as Athens was growing during its golden age, it started basically butting up against the Spartans, and so they fought this 27-year-long war. Spartans ended up winning and ending the Athenian golden age. And then for religion in ancient Greece, of course, they believed in the Greek pantheon of gods, all the different gods and goddesses. And they believed that it was essential for basically the well-being of the state, that for the state to do well, people needed to worship and honor these gods. And each city had its own god or goddess that was over it. So Athens had Athena, Sparta had Mars or Ares, was over the god of war. And so it was real important to honor those gods. All right, and then Plato, of course, remember there's a lot of philosophers that came out of Greece. Plato was one of them, and he believed that people should live just lives and use rationale, basically, use logical thinking for the most part. But he believed in absolute truth. There was a standard of right and wrong, and people should be judged by it. And then Eratosthenes. We talked about some different people during the Hellenistic period that made a lot of advancements or scientific discoveries, and he's the one that was able to calculate the circumference of the Earth, and was off just by a little bit, by 185 miles. And then Alexander the Great, as he took over, he created an empire that included a lot of different cultures. And in these cultures, when they come together, we call them Hellenistic culture. So Hellenistic culture is Greek culture mixed with Egyptian, Persian, and Indian. So these cultures that he took over. And so you're going to get new ideas, new innovations. You're going to see a new language based off of Greek called Koine. And stuff like that. So basically, when empires develop, they bring cultures and groups of people together that before were not together. And so you're going to have the exchange of ideas and beliefs and goods and all of that, and it's going to create new things and things like that. Again, another question going back to the physical geography of Greece and just how the mountains and the islands would separate the people, creating separate cultures and kind of isolate the people from one another. To where they couldn't unite together. All right, and then as the Roman Empire starts taking over and becoming more and more powerful, and especially during Pax Romana, it gets to the point where now Rome can buy things that are luxury goods and not necessarily just things that they need to survive. And so one of the biggest luxury goods they buy is silk, and of course they buy it from China. And that trade route between China and the Roman Empire is called the Silk Roads, mainly because that was the main luxury good that was bought from the Chinese. And the Chinese had a monopoly on that product. No one else knew how silk was produced. And so China kept that secret for a good 3,000 years. So that way they could sell a lot. So about $2.5 billion worth of goods were sold on the Silk Road between China and Rome every year. All right, and then a question about a reading. I just hit what the Silk Road was. So again, that will at least be one question on the test about the Silk Road. And then, of course, trade along the Silk Roads was done in caravans, meaning have a large group of people going together, obviously for protection. And then also sailing. You're going to have ports going from China over to India and then over into the Middle East, and then of course from present-day Israel over into Italy as well. So by boat as well. And then kind of comparing and contrasting Roman families and Greek families. One thing that was different is that the Romans, they raised their children at home, whereas a lot of times in Greece, in different city-states, they would send their children away to different places for schooling, or if you're in Sparta, for training, in warfare. And so they didn't really stay at home, just for a short little bit before they were sent off to other places to be raised. All right, and then looking at the Han Dynasty in China, how they picked their different leaders and basically people in the government, and really that was through the civil service examination system. So basically it's a really hard exam that they studied for all their lives. And then based on how you did that exam, that would determine what kind of job you got and what your role would be within the government. And then looking at what the Romans borrowed from the Etruscans. Because remember, the Romans, they borrowed things from the Etruscans, the Latins, and the Greeks. In the Etruscans, they borrowed architecture like the arch and stuff like that. They also borrowed even their clothing, the toga and short cloak and all that came from the Etruscans as well. All right, and then looking at the state religion of Rome before Christianity comes in, of course, they worshipped a pantheon of gods. When I say pantheon, it means many gods. Many gods and goddesses, just like the Greeks, and of course a lot of them were the same gods and goddesses of the Greeks. They just changed their names and things like that. So again, just like the Greeks, it's very important to their daily life, and they believed it's very important for the empire to worship these gods. Then you know what an oligarchy is. We saw this in Sparta. So this is where you got a few powerful people, a small number of powerful people ruling. It's kind of like a collective dictatorship. And then another question about the Punic Wars. Again, just remember who was fighting. Rome and Carthage over controlled the Mediterranean. And then Julius Caesar, we talked about him in the first triumvirate. And of course, he won that in that battle in the first triumvirate. Remember, triumvirate's a group of 3 people ruling, and he won and then took over and created a lot of great changes for the empire, or basically started the empire. And of course, he was assassinated by the Senate since he took power away from the individual senators. Now, Rome's first official emperor of the Roman Empire is Augustus Caesar, Augustus Caesar. Of course, his name was Octavian. He was part of the second triumvirate, won that battle, and then became Augustus Caesar. And then remember again, the name for that period of peace that we saw in Rome for 207 years is called Pax Romana. That's Latin just for Roman peace. And that's when Rome basically was incredibly rich and very vibrant and stuff like that. So things were going good. And then results of Alexander the Great's conquest in the areas that he took over. Obviously, like I said, you're going to see a new Greek language come out of it, new art. This is when they started transitioning to realism. And then architecture, literature, things like that spread all throughout Southeast Asia. And you're going to start in South Asia and over to Europe, and you're going to start seeing philosophical ideas, religious ideas kind of intertwine with each other and mix around during this time. All right, and then looking back at the Roman Senate, especially like during the Roman Republic, you had two social groups that you need to remember: the patricians and the plebeians. So the patricians are your rich, kind of ruling class people. Your plebeians are your commoners. So the Senate was mainly patricians. It's mainly the rich people that were in the Senate that controlled it. And the first code of law that we saw come out of Rome was called the 12 Tables. That was created by the Roman Republic. And that was, positioned everywhere throughout the Roman Forum so everyone could see. And that mainly just controlled the city of Rome and just that surrounding area for the most part. And again, Pax Romana, the period of peace and prosperity that we saw throughout the empire. And then remember who was in each triumvirate. So there's two triumvirates we talk about. The first triumvirate was Caesar, Crassus, and Pompey. And of course, Julius Caesar won that one. And again, remember Rome's first emperor is Caesar Augustus. And then the people there was two leaders at the end of the Roman Republic before it transitioned empire. You have the Gracchus brothers who tried to, take land away from the rich, give it to the poor. And they were really, kind of like I said, the Robin Hood of Rome. Of course, they were killed as well because they tried to help people. And then, of course, the person that rose to power is dictator in 47 BC, the first dictator we see in the Roman Republic, and that's Julius Caesar when he takes over. All right, and then there's actually one question on here that got repeated. That's funny. Okay, and then in Rome, so as it becomes an empire and takes over this huge region, of course, you're going to have large variations of people throughout this empire. And so the Romans, they still respected local customs and even local religions as long as they didn't start competing against the empire or taking away authority from the empire. So like the Jews, for example, were allowed to keep their traditions. The Romans considered that an ancient religion, and so they allowed them to continue to worship. All right, then looking at the city of Rome itself, so even though this is a magnificent empire that had a lot of power, one of their big problems is that the Romans that lived there were mainly very poor. There's just a few wealthy, but mainly poor people. Living conditions were absolutely terrible in the city. Keep in mind, this is the first major city on Earth, and you got 1 million people living there. And so you're going to have a lot of problems. Obviously, it's the first time for people to experience this and to deal with these issues. So you're going to have a lot of nastiness going on. All right, and then why Romans persecuted Christians? Of course, because the Christians, they wouldn't worship the state gods or the emperors, and so Rome took that as a kind of division that they couldn't have because that took away from the power and authority of the central emperor. So they killed Christians by the thousands because of that. And then the Roman ruler or essentially official that ordered the execution of Jesus, the crucifixion, is Pontius Pilate. He was the governor over Judea at the time that ordered the crucifixion of Jesus. Then the Apostle Paul, he was originally called Saul. He persecuted Christians, and then he converted to Christianity, and he started spreading the Christian belief all throughout what we call Asia Minor, which is basically area of Turkey, over into Greece, and then Italy, and even made it as far as Spain. And so he spread Christianity throughout. He started writing letters to all the churches in those regions like Ephesus and Philippi, Thessalonica, Corinth, all of those. And so he really helped Christianity spread throughout the region. All right, and then you know why Constantine divided the empire. So, of course, Constantine did really two big things you have to know. One is making Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. The other one is he divided the empire. And we didn't talk a lot about this, but it's a big deal. And so he divided the empire between east and west. The east was more connected to the Middle East and over to China, so it was much wealthier basically. And then in the west, where Rome was, it was more agrarian. There wasn't as much wealth, and of course, it was a little bit more distant from all the trade routes. And so, since they were dealing with very different problems, he thought it'd be better to divide the empire, put an emperor in Rome, put an emperor in Constantinople in the east, present-day Istanbul. So that way they take care of the varying problems that are going on. But because of that, the west is going to fall about 100 years later. The west side of the Roman Empire falls. The east side, though, stays intact. Technically until 1917. The names of the empires changed, though. All right, and so the western part of the Roman Empire, by the time we get to the 5th century AD, after the fall of Rome, it's mainly Germanic tribes have taken over the Italian peninsula. So there's all kinds of different groups: the Vandals, the Goths, the Visigoths. You don't need to know all those. They're just Germanic tribes that came in. All right, and then as far as where Christianity had spread during the first, 100 years or so after the death of Jesus, it's mainly in the eastern half of the empire. So mainly, the area of where you see Jerusalem, and then over into Asia Minor and things like that. But mainly in that area. So mainly focusing on the Jews and the Greeks were a lot of your big first converts. All right, and then again, remember that the Roman ruler that made Christianity the official religion of the empire is Constantine. And then, of course, the problems that led to the fall of the Roman Empire, you need to know all of those. Obviously, population decline due to plague is going to be a huge one. Things like that. They had a strong military, but the military was weak in the sense that it was divided. People weren't loyal. So it's not that the military was necessarily weak. It's just they weren't united and fighting. All right, then Rome along the Tiber River, just the advantage it had there along the Tiber, of course, is access to the sea. So Rome is not located like right on the coast. It's about 15, 20 miles inland. But the river is big enough that you're able to get access to the Mediterranean from it, which helps, obviously. And then, remember again, the Gracchus brothers, they wanted to try to reform society and redistribute wealth from the rich to the poor. So again, most of these questions are focused on the Greeks and the Romans. Still a couple more here, two more. All right, so remember how the Spartans, they had a lot of slaves. Those slaves were called the helots. So the helots, of course, were the slaves there in that area. About 9. Well, they outnumbered them 10-1 in the region. Then a fortified area on a hilltop is an acropolis. So in a lot of the cities throughout Greece, they had an acropolis. And on top of that, they may have temples. Like in Athens, you have the Acropolis, which is the hill, basically, with a flat top on top. And then the Parthenon is the temple that was on top of it. And most of your city-states had those. All right, so that's it for the Unit 2 test. Like I said, mainly about Greece and Rome, a little bit about Han China. But there's a lot of repetitive ideas as far as these questions go. So it really shouldn't be that hard. Just watch the video, take notes. Watch the video as many times as you can until you're annoyed with my voice and you know exactly what I'm going to say before I say it. If you get to that point, you're going to do great on the test for sure.